Hello, in this video we are going to take a look at question 1 from the 2016 AP Computer Science exam. For this question it asks us to implement a class called the random string chooser, and if you haven't read the question yet, I do recommend that you pause the video and take a moment to read through it. So this first section of the question just kind of explains what the question is about, and then it gives an example here. It's really important that you take a look at the examples, because often if you're not quite clear what the question is asking, you can draw out what you need to do from the example. So if I take a look at this example, I can see right away, for example, that the constructor for this random string chooser needs to take an array of strings. And I can see that it has a getNext function, which is an instance method, and the reason I know it's an instance method is because I'm calling it with an instance of the class there. And then it gives me a possible output here. And it's really good to highlight in this, it says one possible output is shown here, because this doesn't because there's some randomness with this class, they can't give you the exact output. So in this video we're just going to tackle part A, and part A is we are going to write the entire random string chooser class. Your implementation must include an appropriate constructor and any necessary methods. Any instance variables must be private. This is a really important piece with the AP exam. You don't even have to see that. Just know that anytime you write an instance variable, you're going to make it private. That is a significant concept they're trying to stress in the AP exam. The code segment in the example above should have the indicated behavior. That is, it must compile and produce the results like the possible output shown there. Neither the constructor nor any of the methods should alter the parameter passed to the constructor. This is a really important piece, and you really want to watch for comments like this. Generally speaking, is never modify a parameter that's passed into a constructor or into a method unless you have a very specific reason to do so. This is particularly important for reference variables, because if you modify a parameter and it's a reference variable, remember those changes will carry on when whatever method is done. Implementation may copy the contents of the array. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a look at here. And here is the class. So we have our header, public class random string chooser. We have our field here. And the way I've chosen to manage this, and if you look at the solution, the way they've chosen to manage this is essentially you make an array list, and that array list is going to store a copy of all of the words that are passed in the array. I suppose you could do this with a static data structure, that is an array, but it actually makes the question significantly more challenging because of the nature of the function just down here, getNext, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. So what we do first in the constructor is we actually go and construct the list. This again is an important piece, and actually in a lot of AP questions you see they actually are testing for this. If you have your field, this is declaring the list. This is actually constructing the list. If you don't construct the list, you can't add elements to it, because this would be a null reference. So all we have to do is write a loop structure that's going to take each of these elements and we're going to copy them into this structure here. And there's two approaches you can use. You could use a for each loop. I really tend not to use for each loops, probably because I just didn't learn them when I was first learning to code. But a for each loop would just be set up like this. Remember, the benefit of a for each loop is that when you're looping through a data structure, that is a list or an array, it means that you don't need the notation to indicate you're getting a specific element, because a for each loop is a specific type of loop that's been designed to go through a list or array sequentially. It only goes sequentially from start to end. So it's for very specific cases. And the way you set up a for each loop is the first piece of information is the type of data that the structure contains. The next is what is the variable name you're going to refer to it as in the structure, colon, and then the structure we're using. So if we take a look, we are going to loop through this array, which is of type string. We are going to refer to it as A inside the loop, and the name of the structure is right there, words. And I simply go list.addA. And that's it. Now, alternately, you could do this with a regular for loop, and that's this right here. I've commented it out. But you can notice the difference here. With the for each loop, we just say A because it knows it's going sequentially. But with the standard for loop, we have to say words at I, because I is counting through each index. So if we scroll down here, so the next thing they want us to do is they want us to implement this getNext function. Remember, this is an instance function, so there's no static modifier here. It's just public string getNext. And it's really important when you're doing these types of questions to always go back to the problem and take a look. In this case, let me scroll down and take a look. In this case, they haven't, but often what they'll do is they'll give you the method headers. And that's really helpful sometimes if you don't know what to do in the question. So back into here. So the first thing we're going to account for is that if the size of the list is empty, we're going to return none. And as soon as we reach this return statement, the function's done. And that's why I don't have to put the remaining code inside an else statement. I can just continue on, because if we reach this return statement here, we're done. So what we need to do is we need to generate a random integer, which is a possible index within the list. And the way we do that is, or one way to do that is to use the math.random, and math.random returns a random double value between 0 inclusive to 1 exclusive. So we're going to multiply that by the size of the list, and that's going to go from 0 inclusive to the size of the list exclusive. It means it will never reach the size of the list. So if I have an example, my list has 5 elements, this is going to generate from 0 to 4.999999999, but it will never actually generate 5. And then we cast that value to an int because we need to use it to access via that index value, which is an integer value. A really common mistake here that students make, and you see it a lot in the AP, in the multiple choice questions in the AP prep guides, is they'll give you something like this in the multiple choice, and they'll be talking about which ones generate some integer value between a range. And the problem here is that because you're casting math.random immediately to an integer, that's always going to result in 0, because math.random generates a number between 0 inclusive to 1 exclusive, and when you chop off the decimals, you end up with 0 times list.size, and so you're just always going to get 0 from this. So if you run your code, if you have coded this, or you ever run into a situation where you're always generating a 0, that's probably why. It's a good error to watch for. Now there's 2 ways to do this, because what we need to do is we now need to get that element to return, and then what we're going to do is we're going to remove it from the list. So this is the way this works, and this is what a lot of people do, is they're going to make a string and they're going to say list.getI. So that's going to get the element from our list and put it in this variable string. Then we're going to remove that element from our list, and then we're going to return s. And that works perfectly okay. Though that works, what's better is to take advantage of a feature of the remove function which a lot of people don't recognize. So the remove function will actually remove an element from a list, but it does return, it returns that element it has removed as the return type. So I can simply complete those 3 lines just like this. I can simply return list.removeI and put a semicolon there. So this will remove the element from the list, and then it will return it out to be processed in any way that's necessary. So we scroll down, I've generated some test code here. Again, this is not part of the question, but I wanted to make sure this works. And I've simply copied the test code directly from the AP exam. So I've copied this test code from right here. And if we jump back in here, so that's my construction of my object, and then I go through and I access the getNext. So if I run this now, wheels on the bus, none, none. Run this again, the bus on wheels, none, none. And so what's happening is it's pulling out those strings each time. Now a final little note here. You notice how their output here goes onto each one, I1 on a separate line. It's not important for this AP question, it's just a little bit in terms of the test code. The test code, they do a print as opposed to a print line. So that's part A of the 2016 Computer Science Free Response Question 1. And in our next video, we'll take a look at part B, which makes use of this class in a different context. I hope this helped, and as always, please don't hesitate to ask any questions.